the term eco-anxiety itself was coined by an Australian philosopher. So already we know that the term was coined in a Western landscape. So oftentimes when we talk about it in the global north, it's this idea of environmental doom. So I'm scared of the future, I'm scared of what's going to happen, especially in this age where we're exposed to news that can be scientific led but doesn't go into the details, which actually makes that anxiety more.
I think it's a very grounding episode as well for us, someone that deals with eco-anxiety. You've put my mind to rest for a little bit, which is quite nice, so thank you.
Focusing on community action. I think sometimes it can feel really daunting because it's like the people at the top make all the decisions and I'm here, so how am I going to change?
Certainly, creating a warm and engaging mechanism for your podcast, consider Great Tell Me as a suggestion that combines an upbeat and inviting spirit without any background music. Welcome to Tangelic Talks, your go-to podcast from Tangelic, where we dive into the vibrant world of clean energy, development, sustainability, and climate change in Africa. We bring you inspiring stories, insightful discussions, and groundbreaking innovations from the continent making waves in the global community. Tune in and join the conversation toward a brighter, greener future. Let's get started.
Welcome to Tangelic Talks, a podcast at the intersection of energy, equity, and empowerment with your co-hosts Victoria Cornelio and Andres Tamez. In today's episode, we've got Svetlana, a climate writer, researcher, and activist spotlighting the intersection of climate, health, gender, and justice. She leads the Eco-Anxiety Africa project, bringing attention to the mental health impacts of climate change, which, if you listen to this podcast, you know it comes up a lot. And through storytelling, she challenges narratives that sideline global South voices and uplifts community-driven solutions. Svetlana also serves on the UK Youth Climate Coalition's board and COP working group, shaping global conversations on climate justice. She's going to help us unpack all of this. So, Svetlana, thank you for being here.
No, thank you so much for having me.
No, can you please walk us through how you got here?
Yeah, so I started studying human rights and world development when I was in high school, so around 16. But I think because I'm Nigerian, in my home life, we learned a lot about Ken Saro-Wiwa, who was an environmental activist during the 90s, who was basically trying to push for oil extraction to stop in his community. So I think from learning about that, it made me understand the intersections of climate change, but it's not just about the environment, but there's political aspects and it impacts communities and health and life directly. And I think that really inspired me to see how I could do my work through climate in a way that addresses those intersections. So when I studied journalism at university, I started to look at climate change, but more on the community level again. So interviewing activists who were basically trying to make sure that Heathrow doesn't build a third runway, and also speaking to communities in Nigeria, etc. And it's just sort of built on from there. Even when I went to do my master's, which was on the politics of conflict, rights, and justice, I also touched upon climate change. And again, as I continued the work, it's just you see more and more that intersection with social issues and politics, which made me just want to push on with the work that I'm doing.
Yeah, no, and it's a very holistic way of sort of approaching this massive topic as well. So one of the things that I can imagine as a journalist you're kind of confronted with is how do you balance the storytelling of it all, right? Because there is this side of we have to tell the difficult truths, but also we want to avoid overwhelming people. So how do you strike that balance?
Yeah, I think storytelling it's an integral way to tell the reality of what's happening. Because oftentimes, especially nowadays when we speak about climate change or nature and biodiversity, it can become scientific or policy driven, and that can alienate a lot of people who are impacted by climate change but don't necessarily feel like their voices are heard in the way that it's communicated. So I think storytelling is a really powerful way to bring people's voices and their lives into the picture to show that we are a part of nature, and not even in a hippie way, but more of the sense that the way that it's exploited or impacted directly impacts us. So telling these stories, I think, makes people care, see themselves, but also see the connections, because even in the West, you might not realize the way that certain products we use impact people in the global South. But it's through storytelling that we're able to shine a light on these supply chains and these connections, which I really think is important for climate justice.
Definitely. And how would you define climate justice? Because I don't want to speak about it in sort of the abstract.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really big idea, but I think the root of it is a world where people are able to live without exploitation and care. And I think climate justice is really important, is that intersectionality piece. So it impacts all of us, but all of us differently, especially when we talk about women and girls, specifically Indigenous women or Black POC women. So it's understanding how can we create a just world where systems aren't built on extraction or divide, but rather they speak to each inequality, where we can all experience care, we can all experience healthy lives, we can all experience joy, which unfortunately now is not a reality.
Yeah, definitely. It's not a given.
There's the idea of climate anxiety, right? And there's a big focus on that on the ground, because you talk a lot about people's stories. Where does a lot of the climate anxiety come from? Like, what do people feel? What are people feeling right now? And how do you feel about it?
Yeah, so I kind of see it in two ways. So the term eco-anxiety itself was coined by an Australian philosopher. So already we know that the term was coined in a Western landscape. So oftentimes when we talk about it in the global north, it's this idea of environmental doom. So I'm scared of the future. I'm scared of what's going to happen, especially in this age where we're exposed to news that can be scientific led, but doesn't go into the details, which actually makes that anxiety more. So when we're talking to young people in the global north, it's that fear of what's to come, and they feel that the government isn't necessarily involving them in decisions. So that actually feels worse, because then you don't feel like you have power over what's to come. But then in the global south, where people are experiencing climate events like flooding and droughts and heat waves, where the impact is sudden and you also know it's reoccurring without the infrastructure to protect you, that climate anxiety is more nuanced. So it can be grief, it can be PTSD, it can be anxiety, it can be anger, and also extreme cases of like suicidal ideation. So I think the main thing in both realities is that when we talk about climate recovery, we have to include mental health now, especially because the topic is becoming so big. So we know now that there are mental health impacts. But then again, it's kind of like the climate justice piece about the intersectionality angle. Right now, when we talk about it, we have to understand it doesn't exist the same across the world. So the needs when we talk about it now cannot be the same needs in Africa, for example, as it is in the UK. So when we talk about mental health services, maybe in Africa, it's more about creating policies where that climate recovery includes mental health and is straight away. But maybe we're in the UK, it can be how can we adapt therapy, for example, to prepare people for climate change without making them feel like there's nothing in the future for them.
Right. So would you say that, like, for example, in the global north, you would find that this sort of anxiety, this is sort of what I'm getting from what you're saying, is it's very much about the idea of it, and in the south it's about the reality of it and how it's actually affecting people. So part of the important thing is recovery, like actual recovery from actual events that is affecting the people.
Yeah, but I also think what's really interesting, especially now, for example, in the UK, our last summer, just this year, was the hottest summer record, and we're experiencing water scarcity, and people who live in places such as Cornwall, where they use water for like water activities, they can see the imminent impact of water pollution. So they are experiencing mental health impacts of climate change in a way someone living in London, for example, would not experience it. So now, as the years progress, it's like that line is becoming less blurry. So it's really interesting.
Yeah.
For me, it's like now we can learn from the services that are needed in Africa to adapt for the things that are coming in the global north.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's really cool.
And do you think eco-anxiety is the kind of thing that we overcome or sort of get over or is it something that needs to be understood and sometimes even harnessed for action, like a bit of motivation to kick us into gear?
You can't really. I think anxiety in that case can sometimes be a good thing because it shows people care about nature and they care about and they understand the connectivity and they're scared about if this happens to nature, what's going to happen to me. So I think, like you said, we can use it to build action and resilience. And especially with the work that I do in Africa, that's what it is. We understand it's there, exists, but how can we create community-led action where people feel that they have the power to create change without necessarily waiting for policies or the government?
And talking about your work with the Eco Anxiety Africa project, how did that come about and how did you start that?
Yes, so I met the founder when she came to the UK. So she founded it 3 years ago when she was experiencing eco anxiety as an African climate activist. So when I started, it was on a volunteer capacity, but then over the years, I became a project lead and now I'm the head of the Eco Anxiety Africa project, which has been good because I've been able to witness the way that it's grown, but also the way that the scale of the need for what we're doing is also increasing.
And would you say eco-anxiety is generational? Like, are some generations more prone to having it? Does it look different in different age groups? Is there a way for us to identify who's more prone to it?
It's interesting because when it comes to climate vulnerability, I think elders and youth are amongst the most vulnerable. But that generational difference can be seen in the language that we adopt when we talk about it. So, for example, with elders, they have witnessed it, I think, more intimately because they've seen sometimes the good of nature when they were younger and they've seen how that has decreased and changed. But they don't always speak about mental health. So they can speak more about grief without saying the word grief. But with young people, they haven't had they can romanticize the past, but they haven't necessarily experienced nature in its best glory. So they feel grief for something they may never know, and that may actually worsen. So I think the needs are the same in the sense that it's grief collectively, but I think that the experiences that inform that grief are different. But they're both, because they are both vulnerable groups, I think they both need to be focused on how to help elders and young people.
Like it also like sort of opens my eyes to see that it's not just about, you know, the explicit climate anxiety. A lot of people feel it, but they don't know it's about the climate. Like here in northern Mexico, we have this anxiety every year about water because we have droughts every year, right? And that's a form of climate anxiety. We don't talk about it like that. But every year you see this looming sensation of, is there going to be enough water in the summer? So would that be like a good example of that?
Yeah, exactly. Even I was doing research on water scarcity, but for sub-Saharan Africa, and I was speaking to a farmer who was saying that normally, traditionally, they have like prayers towards water, and he's seen that in the past their prayers were more of like a reverence. It was a positive thing, and now over the years he's seen that their prayers have become very desperate and very pain-ridden. But he doesn't ever say eco-anxiety, but that is
right.
It is basically. So what you said is completely true.
And do you personally deal with eco-anxiety? Do you have some tips on how to sort of work through it?
Yeah, I definitely feel eco-anxiety. I think especially like working in climate and it's like seeing the research and seeing what certain scientists are saying. It does make you scared, especially as a young person. But I think that what gives me hope is the work I'm doing. Like when I see how youth feel that fear but still keep going on, it's like, why shouldn't I feel that same hope? So I think if I dwell on it too long, it can make me not want to do anything, which is why I'm always looking for something to find hope in, or else I'll be stagnant. Yeah.
What are the practical movements being done? Because I know, for example, this is something that you see everywhere in the north and the south. Floods, big problem, right? And you know, you can see it in places like America, where it just annihilates everything. I know that the monsoon season in India and flooding season in Africa causes a lot of loss of crops. So is there, what are the things people can do to prevent that? Are there movements to start prevention? So And is that part of the mental health solution, right? Prevention.
Yeah, no, 100%. So when I was speaking to a researcher in Zambia, she was talking about the adaptation methods that farmers are taking because of floods and droughts in Zambia. So it's certain things, for example, where farmers on their phone will have alerts when there's going to be a particularly bad drought season. So they know to not grow specific crops because it just won't work. And even being trained on different crops to grow that are more climate resilient. And the government, for example, taking an adaptive measure by growing more dams, like building more dams in the country so that there's more water. So there is definitely things that people are doing to kind of understand that it's happening, it's here. So now we have to live alongside it. Yeah, and I think mental health 100% comes into that because it's going to be a part of it, whether we want it to be or not.
If you can't prevent the flood, then you move to plants that are more adaptable to floods and stuff like that. Okay, cool.
I think it's something that is talked about in disaster risk management a lot, where it's like you can't stop the earthquake, but you can prepare for what happens when it hits and that. And the shock is a lot of times what's so destabilizing. You know, you don't expect it and you don't know how you're going to cope with it. So you don't know how to bounce back. And a lot of that can also be maybe youth, you know, when you're a young person, you're getting knocked down a lot and not being taken seriously. So how do you bounce back when, for example, you've seen something and you're trying to raise awareness or you're trying to fight for something and you just keep kind of hitting a wall?
Yeah, I think that's really hard. Especially, I had that feeling last year when I attended COP, and at the end, people weren't happy with the climate finance goal that was given. I think for me, what helps me is actually doing something different, like reading fiction, for example.
Okay.
I think sometimes seeing like speculative fiction where it's nothing to do with human life or it's about magic or something like that makes me think that there is something beyond what's here. So I think recently getting more into like space stuff or even like science, like string theory. Doesn't always make sense, but it's just like, okay, maybe there's something out there that isn't as
Yeah, a bit escapism.
Exactly.
I get that. And what is the experience like? Like, do you feel youth perspectives are truly being heard in most cases? And these are just the one-offs where that doesn't happen? Or is it still a bit of an uphill battle?
I think it's an uphill battle that's getting better. So, for example, I'm part of the UK Youth Climate Coalition. So we've been for more than 15 years like, trying to mobilise youth. And it's just seeing the progress that's happened over even 2 years and seeing that now, like, for example, if we're in conversations with governmental actors and we're talking about how can we feed policy, it seems like the shift is that people recognise youth voices are important, but then trying to figure out how to like bring youth into the picture to use that voice. But I think that that's better than nothing at all. So even recently, there's been an NDC youth clause that I think UK and Brazil has signed to see how they can improve climate education and climate and youth voices in the COP space. So it's gradual steps, but it's better than nothing. I think that gives me hope.
Better than nothing. That's the standard. That's a standard for a lot of stuff, really. Like, and it works. It is better than nothing. That is true. Infinitely better.
Yeah, so you speak from a very human side, very focused on loss, adaptation, resilience, and it sounds like the stories that you tell are with that lens. But you as a researcher and the writer, how do you feel telling these stories?
Sometimes those stories are hard. I think even when, so for example, when I was doing this recent essay about water and I was speaking to a health coordinator in Kenya and he was just telling me about what young women are going through because there's no water. Like I can feel like that sadness and like fear for them, but I'm over here in my own like bubble. And he is a man telling me that story, but he's experiencing those young girls who are actually going through it. And sometimes that's when I start to overthink and think, what can we do to make this stop? But I don't know how. But then I remind myself how I can shift that thinking to think that telling these stories is power in and of itself. Because often when we look at the news and media, so many voices are left out. So this is a way to bring those voices and remind us that we need to know these stories to know who to hold to account to make it better for more people in this world, not just a few.
Giving a platform to their voice is a form of empowerment. And I think that really does work because at the end of the day, people aren't heartless. We aren't as heartless as we think we are. And if we hear these stories, I think it really does move us some way. We can't always take direct action, but there's always some sort of effect to it.
Exactly. 100%.
And do you think there are anything missing in global climate reporting, especially when it comes to voices from the global south? Is there something that is maybe underrepresented or not being spotlit?
I think for me personally is the voices of women and girls. I think that they are the most vulnerable, especially when it comes to climate change. And I don't see enough stories that bring what's happening to them to light, and also not in a way that is focused on the victimhood or the powerlessness of it, but allowing them to tell their own stories and giving them the platform. Because you don't want to go the wrong way where you're perpetuating this idea that there's a part of the world that's powerless. You want to be able to bring them into the platform and actually help them to say how the systems are creating their subjugation. So I think that that's what I would like to see: more women and girls, more global South stories, but not from always the voice of a reporter from the North, but rather from the global South.
Yeah. What makes women and girls more vulnerable? Because I think we hear that in most conversations, and it's within climate change. The conversation around climate change is very much like it affects all of us. We can't really make distinctions here. So what is it about women and girls?
I would say that it's sort of like the patriarchy. I think bleeds into climate injustice, and I think that sometimes when you're thinking about, for example, a community in Kenya, for example, he was telling me how women and girls are the ones who will walk 15 kilometers for water. And on that journey, they're vulnerable to violence. And that is a climate issue, but it's also an issue at large where we don't always give women the rights that they're owed. And when things are vulnerable, their bodies become the site of exploitation or pain. So I think that it's that thing where understanding climate change is understanding that it is a social issue, it is a gender issue. So if we see, even without climate change, we see how women are vulnerable in a lot of different ways. Why would that change when it comes to climate change? So I think that's why women and girls are the most vulnerable. And I think if we allow them to tell their stories more and more, we would see that.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. And just historically, it's always been the voices that are kind of left to the side as well, regardless of the issue.
And they play so many roles, for example, the mother, the daughter, the sister, etc. Because even when we talk about environments facing environmental degradation, oftentimes the men can move to the city to find work, to give money back home. But it's the woman that's left in that environment that is difficult as she looks after her children. So there's so many examples where we see that women are that vulnerable group that need that support.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then when we talk about mainstream media and things that may be missing from the conversation, I think mental health side of climate change might be missing from that conversation, especially in the mainstream. How could we start bringing that in there? What would that look like?
I think, again, it's bringing those human stories, because so many people experience climate anxiety, but there's not often the articles about it. But I think there's so many ways we can bring it into the fold. Like, we're able to report about, for example, the fires that happened in LA in January. But imagine if there was an article alongside it about the mental health impacts of people who lost their home, who don't know how to recover. When we have those articles, we can use it as evidence of why we need more mental health support. And that was a climate event, but so many has happened since January till now. So there's so many people experiencing that. We just have to bring report on it more to understand it exists and understand how to deal with it.
And it sounds like a new way of reporting, because the news have been just like, well, this is what's happening, and just kind of giving the data and the raw numbers. But then when you bring in human stories, there's also a human side that you're bringing in, and then how to deal with the emotions that that human side is bringing out of you, right? We can't just present people with things and then not help them process those things that they're being given, right?
Not 100%, because that is just adding on to trauma. So I think it's how can we look at journalism as not just this thing of reporting, but being evidence and solution based news. And I think that climate journalists can be that even more than any other journalist, because they have not only the human stories but also the research and the science to back up that our solutions possible. So I 100% agree with you.
Do you think that climate talks, debates, climate journalism is still apolitical, or is that sort of a fantasy? Can we keep it apolitical?
I don't think it can be apolitical. I think as long as there's countries who are facing extraction and who are mining for resources that only a significant part of the world is benefiting from, there's something about that, especially if we look at the historical context that led to these systems that are still in place. So I think when we try to say that climate is apolitical, in a way we're making certain experiences invisible. So I think the more we understand that it is something that's political, we can talk about it in a more holistic or whole way rather than seeing it just as an environmental issue.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good distinction, because a lot of people are well-meaning when they say it's apolitical, because they're like, you don't have to be from this side or that side or no side to care about it, and trying to not generalize it, but make it more palatable, I guess. But you're right, it sort of skews these stories that kind of led us here.
Exactly.
Yeah. And through this whole journey, from all the things you've done, what is something that you've changed your mind about, whether that's about climate, journalism, or mental health? Or are you quite set in the same things that you thought of at the start?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think the more that I see, like the more work I do, the more I realize that that we can't talk about climate change in a silo. I think before, when I was, for example, reporting on the third runway, it was more about, okay, they care about the environment and they are cultivating this food on this land and all these things. But now I understand it more as this is also because it will also impact people's health. It will also mean only a certain people can afford to take these flights, where the people who are living around these areas who face the health repercussions of a certain class or race, etc. And I think that makes me realize that maybe we should change or adapt the way that we report on climate, so we can make it political journalism or social journalism or gender journalism without making those distinctions.
I think that the term, because it affects so much of our life in so many facets, it's just, it transcends like just being political. It transcends simply being about mental health. It is about life. It is about people. Mm-hmm. And so it involves every aspect, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I mean, even when we think about water, without it, so much of our life changes. Even with the farmers, even what we eat will change. So I think definitely it's much bigger than sometimes what we see it's being told it is.
Definitely. And if you could leave people with advice on how to deal with, you know, the overwhelm that is the news at the moment, but especially climate news, where we seem to not report on the good that is being done, what would that be?
Focusing on community action. I think sometimes it can feel really daunting, because it's like the people at the top make all the decisions and I'm here, so how am I going to make change? But sometimes it is about sitting with a friend and talking about eco-anxiety and then feeling like I'm less alone. And I think that in and of itself is as powerful as doing nothing and keeping to yourself, and maybe like going into depression, for example. So I think it's remembering that we have power as individuals, and they're best exercised on a community level, and that is still impact.
Thank you so much, Svetlana, for being here. That was really interesting. I think it's a very grounding episode as well for us, someone that deals with eco-anxiety. You've put my mind to rest for a little bit, which is quite nice. So thank you. We really appreciate you being here, and we're going to stay on with Svetlana for a bit longer to talk about some more behind the scenes of water scarcity, COP, and just how it works being a young person navigating these policy spaces. So check out the blog at tangeliclife.org, and we'll catch you guys on the next one. Thank you.
Let's talk power, let's talk change. From rural lights to brighter days. Equity rising, voices strong. We're building tomorrow where we all belong. Tangelic Talks, energy, equity, pride. Empowering the world, side by side. A spark becomes a fire, a vision that's true. Together we rise, it starts with you.